And you just don't need to do all that. The resume, granted, you've got to have enough keywords, or you need plenty of keywords to get through the screening, the automated screening, and the function of the resume is basically to get you the interview, or at least give you a phone conversation on the phone that might lead to a serious interview with a panel or maybe even on site. And that's it. And then when you go to the interview, if you know your material, it'll be very obvious to everyone that you know your material because you've been doing it. And I understand if you're new on the job market, you're just out of college or something like that, it's a different situation for you. But if you have to bend over backwards and compete with all these people, you just need to step back and regroup and get some training. Nowadays, especially, there's all kinds of things where you don't necessarily need to go to college. You can get some ancillary training and let the market tell you what to do because you may have invested an enormous amount of time in education because your guidance counselor said that, hey, here, takes this Myers-Briggs exam, and the Myers-Briggs test, these psychologists are experts and they'll tell you what to do. And so you took the test, and the test said that basically you like people and you want to help people and you should be in a helping career, so you majored in social work, and it turns out that you know that just doesn't pay the rent. Okay, you have to face facts and you have to regroup, and maybe you need to do something ancillary or something that might be seen as regressive or a lateral move. You don't need to go to law school. You don't need to go to grad school because then you're probably just digging the hole even deeper. So that doesn't mean that you wasted 4 years on your social work degree or that's a bad thing. It just means that facts are facts, and you were gullible enough to believe your guidance counselor, who was supposedly an expert, and you believed Myers and Briggs, but Myers and Briggs aren't going to pay your rent. And and there's nothing wrong with working for a productive company that produces things. You're helping people when you work in a company that makes things that people need, like food, shelter, security, all those things that we appreciate. Dentistry, that's real wealth. Um, so yeah, if you're the right skill set, you'll get your foot in the door someplace, and you'll build skills. As long as you aren't screwing off playing on your phone like some people do, and you're learning every day, and you're gonna have no problem. So just don't break your back on all this stuff, and don't be gullible enough to believe this nonsense. These people don't know what they're talking about. Okay, but he is CEO of Korn Ferry, the world's largest hiring and recruiting firm, which I've never heard of. So I don't know how do you measure that? How is it the largest? Is it market capitalization? How do they figure that out? So, but I guess that sounds good, and so we'll let him write an article and put some advertisements on there, and you'll read it. Okay, so back to how else is there market manipulation? Okay, so we talked about jobs, and we talked about you're basically just going to get your 2% raise every year. So if you come into a company, a major company, at $19 an hour, and you got lowballed by the recruiter, the only way you're going to really get a serious raise based on your ability is to change companies. And maybe you'll go back to that first company again later at some point, but they can never really give you more than that 2% raise. I mean, maybe they'll give you 3% if you're really good because there's some guy they want to punish and they don't want to give him a raise because he plays on his phone all day. So they give him 0% and they give you 3% because they've got a 2% bucket. But one of the things that you can do if you have some flexibility is that you can relocate, hopefully not too far. As I said earlier, rents are much more liquid than wages because wages are greatly manipulated by systems where they use this carrot to try to keep you with the company because companies don't want turnover. They want to try to keep people, and so they put the carrot in front of you, so they promise you a pension, and then the pension turns out to be bankrupt, or there's really no money there, or got squandered, or whatever. But there's other things too, like after 5 years, you get a third week of vacation. After 15 years, you get a fourth week of vacation. Um, Although I've worked for companies that they pulled that from people. If you were a white collar worker, like an engineer or a middle manager, in 2012, I think, or so, they decided that all of a sudden, if you're a non-wage earner, you get as much vacation as your manager feels like giving you. So if you've been there 30 years and you accrued 6 weeks of vacation, all of a sudden now you have as much vacation as your manager feels like giving you or not giving you. And you're also still not overtime eligible. So there's all kinds of manipulation that companies can get away with, and their earnings still look good and their dividends are being raised, but underneath that, part of it is just that they're cutting costs. And even I remember in 2013, very early 2013, February, I think, the market was recovering. The housing was even recovering at that point. And yet my company came out early in the year and said that no one was going to get any raise. So it didn't matter if you worked harder than the other guy, you're both getting a 0% raise. Not only that, but what what is where does that come from? If the economy is recovering, why would they not give us a raise? And I think basically after 1 or 2 years of seeing no turnover, they say, look, we don't have any turnover. Nobody's leaving. So there must not be opportunities. So let's see what we can get away with, and we'll not give anybody a raise. And then, maybe a few people left, but, they got away with it, at least for a year. But what you do see is that when certain housing markets just skyrocket, like Seattle tripled in 10 years, it's hard to bring people in. It's hard to bring talent in because unless you are the plant manager and you're creative enough to give people a huge raise, um, you're not going to be able to relocate people because they just can't get the purchasing power that they had from Kansas or wherever they were. That can reverse sometimes, and as this Jason Hartman shows in this show, you're seeing an exodus. But these are the people who can vote very easily with their feet. Okay, so they don't need to be in Los Angeles. Apparently, if you're a coder, you can go to Las Vegas. What they don't show here is Reno, Nevada. The MSA for Reno has gone up, rents have gone up 15% this year alone. Whereas in tech cities like Seattle, they've dropped maybe 10, 11% already. So the way you're going to get your raise is to look at this. Because if somebody offers you a job in Reno and you say, aha, the rents in Reno are lower, and I can calculate that, yeah, I can make $1 less, but the rents are half what they are in Seattle. Um, you have to be aware that you've got the rent can change, and you're probably not going to be able to get a mortgage or get your house the first year you're there. So you have to be aware that you could go there and then, a year later you're paying a lot more for rent because it's a much more liquid market. So there's certain markets that are not as liquid, like the job market, and then there's certain markets that are very liquid, and it's difficult to get the best of both worlds. So if you're living in Seattle or LA and you see that there's this exodus and that the rents are coming down, you probably want to stay there if you can do that. And this comes from Zumper, and this just makes the point as well. You can see some of these major cities on the West Coast have really dropped this year. So this is year to year. So last September versus this September, we're down 14% in San Francisco. And then there's places that I really wouldn't think of that are way, way up there. Chattanooga, Tennessee. What in the world's in Chattanooga? Um, they're up 15%. So I had a job offer in Huntsville, Alabama, which is a nice place. It was a lower wage, but for me to sit down and do all these calculations and look at the differences, because the commute is longer but the rents are lower, you could go on and on and on. It really doesn't make sense to go there unless it's an obviously huge raise, um, because their rents are rising, whereas the city I live in, the rents are falling. And so it seems like the most sensible thing for me to do. Not that I want to move around or that anybody does, but you have to work, you have to play the hand that you're dealt. And when you're supporting yourself and you don't have numerous incomes, you have to be really, really creative and look at all these things. But I kind of went on a tangent, but I just want to say that I think between ERISA, employment law, incompetence in hiring managers, and that includes recruiters. The recruiters have no idea what they're doing. But hiring managers have told me that they find that to be efficient because if they're making 150 a year doing their job, they don't want to take time to recruit and interview and do all these things. So they outsource it to somebody who can do it for 50 grand a year. That's your recruiter. But the recruiters have an incentive to kind of not bend the truth. They get a kickback, they get a commission, and it's just not an efficient system overall. It might seem to be efficient for the hiring manager, but it's definitely not a good system. Thanks for your time. I hope you learned something. And I think that this is a topic that I would like to see people like George Gammon spend a little more time on because it's as far as I'm concerned, really rather neglected.